Picture this. You're a German fighter pilot, an ace with dozens of kills. You've fought over Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. You've survived 3 years of the most intense aerial combat in history. You're sitting at 27,000 feet over occupied France on a bright April morning in 1943, and you see them coming. American fighters, their first real combat mission over Europe. And you can't stop laughing. They look like flying milk bottles, fat, bloated things struggling to gain altitude. Their fuselages are shaped like barrels. Their wings look too small. Everything about them screams target practice. Your wingman is laughing so hard on the radio he can barely speak. You have no idea that you're looking at the weapon that will destroy the Luftwaffe. You have no idea that within 18 months, the sound of those aircraft will make veteran German pilots physically sick with fear. You have no idea that the ugly, ridiculous American fighter you're mocking will rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. This is the story of how the P-47 Thunderbolt went from being the biggest joke in the sky to becoming the most feared aircraft in World War II. The beast nobody wanted. When American pilots first saw the P-47 Thunderbolt, most of them refused to believe it could fly. It weighed 7 tons fully loaded. 7 tons! That's heavier than 2 cars! It was the fattest, ugliest fighter anyone had ever seen. The British pilots flying sleek Spitfires took one look at it and started calling it the Jug, because it looked like a milk jug with wings. American pilots weren't any happier. They'd been flying nimble P-40s and hoped for something light and agile. Instead, they got this monster. One pilot said it was like trying to fly a freight train. Another said it looked like someone had strapped wings to a water tower. The training accidents were horrific. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the 56th Fighter Group lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than it did Germans in its first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing. It torque-rolled on takeoff. It dove so fast that controls locked up as the aircraft approached the speed of sound. The man who designed it, Alexander Kartveli, knew exactly what people thought. When his team expressed concerns about the aircraft's size, he admitted, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." Nobody realized that this dinosaur would evolve into an apex predator. The Germans couldn't stop laughing. April 8, 1943, the P-47's combat debut over Europe. German ace Oberlieutenant Ralph Hermann watched the American formation climbing toward him. He keyed his radio. "My friends, they have sent us flying milk bottles." The German pilots burst into laughter. Some of them were laughing so hard they had tears in their eyes. The early fight seemed to prove the Germans right. The P-47 couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190. It couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109. German pilots quickly learned to attack from below, where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled, forcing turning fights where the American behemoth wallowed like a drunk elephant. Hauptmann Joseph Pips Priller, an experienced German ace, sent a report to headquarters after his first encounter. "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow." German pilots started calling the P-47s Indianer, which meant fat targets pretending to be warriors. In the first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. It was a disaster. British officers quietly suggested the Americans might want to reconsider their choice of fighter. Some British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the cockpit. But something strange was happening that nobody was paying attention to.
the indestructible machine. The P-47s that were getting shot down weren't going down easy. One aircraft returned from a mission on May 4th with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have turned a Messerschmitt or Spitfire into confetti. The pilot landed it safely. Another came back with 3 of its 4 main structural spars shot through. It should have broken apart in midair. It didn't. When German pilots did manage to get their guns on target, they were starting to notice something terrifying. When those 8 American machine guns opened fire, the target didn't just get hit, it exploded. One German pilot reported watching a Focke-Wulf literally cut in half by P-47 fire. The tail fell one way, the nose and cockpit fell another. The pilot never even had time to bail out. But nobody understood just how tough the P-47 was until June 26th, 19...
The man who wouldn't die. Robert Johnson was flying rear guard for a P-47 formation returning from escort duty. German Focke-Wulf 190s bounced them from above, and Johnson's aircraft took the brunt of the attack. 21 20mm cannon shells hit his aircraft in the first seconds. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere. The engine cowling was torn away. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson was wounded in the face and legs by shrapnel. He tried to bail out. The canopy was jammed. A cannon shell had exploded in the canopy track and welded it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. Johnson leveled the aircraft and pointed it toward England. The Thunderbolt kept flying with damage that should have reduced it to falling scrap metal. Then it got worse. A lone German Focke-Wulf 190 found him. The German pilot positioned himself perfectly behind Johnson's crippled Thunderbolt and opened fire with everything he had. 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns, all firing into Johnson's aircraft at point-blank range. Johnson couldn't evade. He couldn't fight back. All he could do was hide behind his armor plate and pray. The German emptied his entire cannon ammunition load into the Thunderbolt. Over 100 rounds. The aircraft kept flying. The German repositioned and fired again with his machine guns. Still, the Thunderbolt flew. Then something incredible happened. The German pilot pulled alongside. Johnson could see his face clearly. Young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something that looked like fear. The German stared at the flying wreck, shook his head in apparent disbelief, gave an informal salute, and flew away. He was out of ammunition, and the American aircraft was still in the air. Johnson's P-47 made it back to England. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after he reached 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. 3 of the 4 main structural beams were shot through. The engine had multiple direct hits. The aircraft had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver and survived. When German intelligence received the combat reports about this incident, they initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. But multiple German pilots confirmed the story. They had witnessed something impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken punishment that should have destroyed 3 conventional fighters and was still flying. The Germans stopped laughing. The lesson learned. American pilots were learning something crucial about the P-47. You didn't fight it like a traditional dogfighter. You used it like a sledgehammer falling from the sky. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke figured it out first. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns.
The P-47's massive weight, the thing everyone thought was a fatal flaw, became its greatest weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a Thunderbolt could hit 550 miles per hour. That was faster than any German fighter could achieve even in a vertical dive. And that speed could be converted back into altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. American pilots developed a tactic they called boom and zoom, though they preferred to call it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. The idea was simple: climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate, wait for the enemy to appear below, roll inverted, dive like a meteor, reach speeds that made you impossible to hit, open fire with 8 machine guns at the bottom of the dive, zoom back to altitude before the enemy could react. When it worked, it was devastating.
The wall of lead. Here's what German pilots didn't understand about those 8 machine guns until it was too late. Each P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of ammunition. 8 guns firing together produced 6,000 rounds per minute. That's 100 half-inch bullets every single second. The guns were set to converge at 300 yards, meaning all 8 streams of fire intersected in a zone about 6 feet across. Anything in that convergence zone faced 100 projectiles per second, each one traveling at 2,900 feet per second. Let me put that in perspective. A 2-second burst put 200 rounds into a fighter-sized target. A German Focke-Wulf 190 or Messerschmitt 109 hit by that kind of firepower didn't just go down, it disintegrated. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead. One said, "The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart, not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from the fuselage, the tail severed, the crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, an aircraft became nothing." The psychological impact was devastating. German pilots had been trained that cannon were superior to machine guns. They believed this because their 20mm cannons had limited ammunition, usually 120 to 200 rounds total, so each shot had to count. The Americans thought differently. Why make each shot count when you could fire 3,400 shots? The result was a fundamental shift in combat philosophy. German pilots had to aim precisely. American pilots just had to point in the general direction and hold the trigger. The sheer volume of fire guaranteed hits. Francis Gabby Gabreski, who became America's top ace in Europe with 28 victories, described it perfectly. When you hit them with all 8 guns, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half. The pilot never knew what hit him. The altitude advantage. By the summer of 1943, German pilots were discovering another horrifying reality about the P-47. It got better as it climbed. German fighters got worse. The P-47's massive turbo supercharger maintained full engine power up to 30,000 feet. German fighters relied on mechanical superchargers that lost performance dramatically above 25,000 feet. At 30,000 feet, a Focke-Wulf 190 or Messerschmitt 109 was gasping for air, sluggish, barely able to maneuver. The P-47 at 30,000 feet was in its element. Full power, perfect performance, completely dominant. German ace Hans Philipp, a veteran with 206 victories, learned this lesson the hard way on October 8, 1943. Leading an attack on B-17 bombers at 28,000 feet, His Focke-Wulf 190 was struggling in the thin air. The engine was gasping, the controls were mushy, everything felt wrong. P-47s dove on his formation from 32,000 feet. Robert Johnson, the same pilot who had survived that impossible attack in June, spotted Phillips' distinctive Focke-Wulf. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Phillips' death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The new breed. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 arrived in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a new propeller. Paddle blade propellers with massive 13-foot diameter blades that bit into the air like giant oars. The improvement was immediate and dramatic. Earlier Thunderbolts climbed at 2,200 feet per minute. The new variants could hit 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. Suddenly, the pregnant cow could climb with the best of them. But it was the sound that terrified German troops. The massive propeller tips reached supersonic speeds, creating a distinctive, thundering roar that could be heard from miles away. German soldiers could identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death was coming. They started calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke, a veteran German pilot, encountered the new variants in February 1944. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The balance had completely shifted. The ground pounder. As P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in the spring of 1944, P-47s increasingly focused on ground attack. This is where the Thunderbolt became truly legendary. The P-47 could carry 2,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage. That's as much as early war medium bombers carried. Add 10 5-inch rockets, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell, and you had a flying artillery battery. But it was still those 8 machine guns that made the difference. The 2-second burst put 160 half-inch armor-piercing incendiary rounds into a target area the size of a truck. German tank commanders discovered that P-47s could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles. Trucks, supply columns, and infantry positions simply ceased to exist under P-47 attacks. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer Grenadier regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced it firsthand. They came in so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those machine guns. A column of 20 trucks simply ceased to exist. One pass, 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage. The psychological effect on the men was devastating.
D-Day. The sky belongs to America. June 6, 1944, the invasion of Normandy. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the landing forces. They created an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. The Luftwaffe tried to break through. It was a massacre. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer was one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day. His report was stark. The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June 1944 alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts destroyed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night. During the day, the sky belonged to the Thunderbolts. Any German vehicle that moved in daylight was destroyed within minutes. German soldiers developed Jabo fever, physical symptoms of stress that appeared when Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced enemy fire for years without flinching became physically ill before missions where P-47s were expected. The distinctive thunder of approaching Thunderbolts caused panic. Survival meant finding cover immediately. And even then, you weren't safe. The final humiliation. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was discovering that even their technological advantages meant nothing. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter could reach 540 miles per hour. It should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch jets in 2 situations: during takeoff and landing, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. Meyer's combat report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire." The concentrated fire of 850 caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft. Even Germany's technological miracle couldn't escape the Thunderbolt's guns.
The industrial avalanche. But the real terror wasn't any individual Thunderbolt. It was the unstoppable tide of them. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war. At peak production, the factory on Long Island completed 1 Thunderbolt every single hour, around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. The ammunition production was equally staggering. American factories produced 30 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition every month. Each round was manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. The Germans couldn't compete. On January 1, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate surprise attack on Allied airfields. At Y-34 Airfield, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured German pilot was brought to the command post. He pointed to the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary. He pointed to the flight line, where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47s filled the flight line. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte. Those losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total, all replaced within a week. The confession.
In March 1945, Oberstlieutenant Josef Prieler, the same pilot who had mocked P-47s as pregnant cows in 1943, was interviewed by German propaganda officials. His statement was deemed too demoralizing for publication. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage. And courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. The verdict. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. German pilots who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear spoke of P-47s in hushed tones decades after the war ended. The final statistics told the story. 7,067 German aircraft destroyed in aerial and ground combat in Europe. 86,000 railroad cars destroyed. 9,000 locomotives destroyed. 6,000 armored fighting vehicles destroyed. 68,000 trucks destroyed. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, and fired 135 million rounds of ammunition. The P-47 achieved a 4.6-to-1 kill ratio in aerial combat while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots, General Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His response captured everything. We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat, we said. They built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win. They were right. Those guns. We called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. Epilogue. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as a flying joke. It ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. German pilots laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, there's a display case containing spent .50 caliber shells and gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. Below it is a quote from an unnamed German pilot taken from a 1945 interrogation report. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you, and you ceased to exist."
The laughter died with our comrades.